All right, thank you everybody for joining us. I'm Rachael Woody. I'm the consulting archivist on this project, working with Astoria Public Library. And with me today is John Goodenberger. He's the city historian for the city of Astoria.
Today, we're going to look at the Russell Dark collection. Russell Dark was a person, and he was a historian. He was a journalist. He came to Oregon around the turn of the century and traveled all around Oregon. His father was a Methodist minister, so we got to see and live in lots of different places. And Russell Dark became a journalist. He worked with the Oregonian for quite some time, starting after World War I. And eventually he made his way here, also continued as a journalist, but then also became the archivist for the county. And he worked in the basement, the mysterious basement of the county courthouse. And we have been the recipient of some of the things that he collected there, in addition to some of the things he just collected in of himself or for himself. He has a wide kind of breadth of interests, both contemporary at the time events, but also historic events. He loved the river and bar pilots. And so there's a great collection of papers on bar pilots. And then with the more contemporary things, he was really fascinated with local politics and how they played out in, say, industry and the port. Specifically, the Alumax site out in Warrenton was one of his favorites, and we can pull out a file there. So what we have with Russell's collection, the things that we specifically identify with him are two regular size boxes and one flat box. We're going to just kind of go through these boxes today and see what's inside them.
For people watching, these particular boxes are specially created boxes for archival historical materials. And so we acquired these boxes thanks to the Oregon Cultural Trust and the Oregon Heritage Commission grants purchased from Gaylord Archival Supply. So for you watching at home, if you have historical materials that you would like to preserve, definitely get these archival boxes because they are made out of better quality materials. Therefore, they won't break down, they won't give acidity to your records. So what we're seeing here is a very specially purchased box for the exact purpose of helping preserve and keep these papers around for longer for historians and future people of the community to enjoy. So,
as I go through the newspaper clipping box for Russell, I have World War II submarine history. Weather in Astoria, and I have a note here, hold on to that for a moment. He was quite fascinated with the sewage lagoon being constructed in the 1970s. Prior to that, we just flushed everything into the river, but in the 70s, we got a legitimate sewer. And then we have Port of Astoria. We have general history, Pearl Harbor newspaper clippings, fishing and gill netting. This, you can tell his bias because he has radical newspapers. And so here we have The Worker from 1953. And here we have Joseph Clark, correspondent for The Worker, back from the USSR. We get all these kinds of biases here, which are wonderful to read when it's happening. But then we start to get into perhaps a little bit more historic documents themselves. And one of the things I enjoy, as a historian, is coming and looking at the Home Seekers edition. And this is from the turn of the century. And what's so important about this? But one of the things that's so nice about this is it gives stats of what it's like to live in Astoria at that time. How many fish are we producing? How many cattle are we producing? And then it talks about and has these beautiful picturesque photos of the farmlands and what you can grow on them. All of that's really important to understand the context. So if you were writing a book report and you wanted to write a context for your book report, something like this would be really interesting if your report was on Astoria and you wanted to fit that report in context. Something else that's of interest in this is a handwritten letter by somebody who was here perhaps in the 1850s and could identify all of where the different buildings were at that time and going into early history of the settlement of Astoria. So a handwritten account of that from somebody's memory. That's super important. It helps me as a historian know that. We have sesquicentennial brochures, stock certificates from early businesses, but I mentioned he was interested in the weather. This is a handwritten account of what was going on in Astoria weather-wise from 1850 to 1875. So someone was keeping track of all of that. I have a legal document I'm looking for here. And if I had my computer on, I would be able to look it up on our spreadsheet, which is going to be much easier for those of when I'm not here, we have a spreadsheet that will guide people to the correct file. Russell Dark had a real interest in the Chinese Americans and their lives here. And frankly, recording them being profiled, to use a modern terminology. So we can look at maybe someday at some of the more other legal documents. But what we have here is a handwritten account from 1885. And this is a court case. And it's an assault case between two Chinese men.
Okay.
And one of the values of this is it gives you such a glimpse of life because you have all of these witnesses coming forward and their testimony is written down. We're learning about life in a cannery, life in a Chinese bunkhouse, and maybe we pick up some other cues or clues along the way of their lives.
Which is invaluable in particular because as we are coming to terms with and trying to rectify now as archivists and historians, the records that we have are the records that were kept and prioritized for keeping usually. And as a result, just as the nature of our history in the United States, a lot of the accounts, a lot of the papers are typically from wealthy white men. And so we are struggling with trying to get representation of everyone's history within these collections. And so as an archivist, I know that's something that we're trying to work on so that the collections are fully representative. And John, I'm sure as you as a historian are working on similar issues.
We are, and it's great that some folks many, many years ago laid out history. That gives us a place to start. Really do need to expand that history and that understanding of any variety of folks within our past. And this is another favorite. I've mentioned it to some of you in previous public presentations. There was a man by the name of Bunko Kelly. That was sort of his nickname. And Bunko Kelly was one of the kings of Shanghai. And he was thrown in the state pen for murder. And while he was laying around on his bunk, he decided to write his autobiography. And here we have with Russell Dark's collection, because he didn't just simply take one example of something, he then had other examples with more information. So for instance, he collected newspaper clippings. This is by Stuart Holbrook, who would have been at the Oregonian about the same time that Russell was there. Stuart Holbrook is an example of a historian who was not necessarily well respected at the time in the 30s and 40s because he interviewed people like loggers fishermen, prostitutes, etc. He
Right.
wasn't interviewing the most wealthy of society. And it's
Hmm.
because of Stuart Holbrook's work that we have documentation to this whole other side of Oregon in the Northwest. And I
Oh.
think Russell appreciated that, and that's why we have this collection.
Hmm. Wow, I did not know that. That is to have such foresight on Holbrook's part to really try and capture all the stories of the people who made up the city of Astoria.
Yeah. Well, and of Oregon, the whole Northwest.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Holbrook was really quite something.
Hmm.
And now he's a beloved author. But in his day, he was, I think, looked down upon by,
Hmm.
by more quote unquote serious historians. So, you can imagine when we started all of this space, the vortex was not in order.
Hmm.
It was a series of boxes and stacks. And as you were going through this, of course, there's a number of times that you pass over things, literally, and setting things aside. How many times did I set this piece of paper aside and not truly look at what it was? And what indeed this is, we can see on this side, it's a receipt from Fort George in 1846. We're not talking about the brewery. We're talking about the original trading post.
Hmm.
And here, somebody's picking up 15 pounds of butter, uh, 50 pounds of salmon, some beef, and some ammunition. And then on the back side, it's very lightly written in pencil. And this is a letter by Alexander Latte. Alexander Latte was one of the last factors of Fort George. He was also an early bar pilot. And in this letter, he is pleading with the man who replaced John McLaughlin for the job as official bar pilot. Alexander Latte is one of the great tragic comic characters of early Astorian. He's highly intelligent, and he is also an alcoholic, and he struggles with that. And that's the reason why he can't keep this job, is because of his alcoholism. And so he's pleading with them, and he's saying, you know who I am. You know all of my problems, and I swear I will get off the spirits if you just give me this job, because he's financially not doing well.
Hmm.
So here, yes, we have this tragic letter, and it's in his own hand.
Yeah.